Zethral sat alone in his observation pod, watching the stars through the curved glass window. The pod was small and cold, built for function rather than comfort. He had spent 40 years in vessels like this one, watching species fight and die across the galaxy. It was his job. He was an observer for the Galactic Council, and his duty was to record battles and report what he saw. Today's assignment seemed simple. A single human ship called the Starbound HFY had been cornered near an asteroid belt in a forgotten corner of space. 3 alien races had joined together to destroy it. The Vorathi brought 20 warships. The Helen brought 12. The Draxus Collective sent 8 more. 40 military vessels against 1 damaged human ship. Zethral opened his recording device and spoke into it. Mission log day 1. I have arrived at the Nexion 7 asteroid belt to observe what the Council believes will be a minor engagement. The human vessel is surrounded and shows significant damage. Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 12. Engine power appears to be at approximately 12%. The ship carries a crew of 200, mostly civilians and low-ranking military personnel. He paused and looked at the human ship floating in the distance. It was bleeding atmosphere from its wounds. Small fires burned in some sections. It looked like a dying animal, wounded and trapped. Initial assessment, he continued. This battle will be over quickly. The humans have no chance of survival. I estimate complete destruction within 30 minutes of combat initiation. Zethral closed the recording device and settled back in his seat. He had seen this before. Smaller species, younger races, trapped by superior forces. They always reacted the same way. Some begged for mercy. Some froze in terror. A few tried to run. None of them ever succeeded. On the bridge of the Starbound HFY, Captain Lisa Warren stood at the center of the room. She was 38 years old, with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had not slept in 3 days. Around her, crew members worked at their stations, their faces lit by the glow of computer screens. "Report," she said, her voice calm and steady. Chief Engineer Danny Cole looked up from his console. He was a large man with grease stains on his uniform. "Engines are at 12%, Captain. I can maybe push them to 20 if I reroute power from the lower decks, but that means no life support below Deck 8. "Do it," Warren said. Weapons Officer Maria Santos spoke next. She was young, barely 25, but her hands were steady on the controls. "We have enough ammunition for maybe 15 minutes of sustained fire. After that, we're throwing rocks." "What about the mining charges?" Warren asked. Santos allowed herself a small smile. "I've been working on those. Modified 2 of them. If I can get them close enough to a target, they'll punch through standard military shields." "How close?" "Very close." Warren nodded. She turned to the communication station, where a young man named Kevin Gray sat with headphones pressed against his ears. "What are they saying?" Gray listened for a moment longer, then pulled off the headphones. "The Vorathi commander is broadcasting a surrender demand. We have 1 hour to power down our weapons and prepare for boarding. If we refuse, they will destroy us." The bridge went quiet. 200 lives hung in the balance. 200 people who had families, dreams, futures that might never happen. Warren looked at each of her officers in turn. She saw fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else. She saw determination. "Send a response," she said. "What should I say, Captain?" Warren thought for a moment. Then she spoke a single word. "No." Gray stared at her. "Just no?" "Just no." He turned back to his console and transmitted the message. Across the void of space, the Vorathi commander received it. His name was Keth Voren, and he had fought in 37 battles. He had never lost. When he heard the human response, he laughed. "They refused to surrender," he told his officers. They choose death. Very well. We will give them what they ask for. In his observation pod, Zethral recorded the human response with interest. He had seen defiance before, but usually it came with lengthy speeches or desperate negotiations. This was different. This was simple. This was a single word that meant everything and nothing at the same time. He made a note in his log. The humans appear to be experiencing psychological denial. This is common among species facing extinction. They cannot accept the reality of their situation, so they reject it entirely. This response will not change the outcome of the battle. But even as he wrote the words, something nagged at him. Something about the way the human captain had spoken. There was no fear in her voice. No desperation. She sounded like someone who had already made peace with death, but also like someone who intended to make death very expensive for her enemies. On the Starboard Hope, the crew worked with quiet focus. There was no panic, no crying, no prayers to forgotten gods. There was only work. Hannah Webb, a petty officer with red hair and freckled skin, crawled through a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for her shoulders. She was rerouting power cables, stealing energy from systems that no longer mattered to feed systems that did in the medical bay. Dr. Paul Ortega treated the wounded. 17 people lay on beds, suffering from burns, broken bones, and radiation exposure. Some of them would not survive even if the ship did. Ortega knew this, but he kept working anyway. As he bandaged a young woman's arm, he taught 3 crew members how to perform basic medical procedures. "Why are you teaching us this?" one of them asked. "Because I might not be around later," Ortega said simply, "and someone will need to take care of the others." Captain Warren walked through the ship, visiting each section, speaking to her crew. She did not give speeches about honor or glory. She simply looked them in the eyes and told them the truth. "We are going to fight," she said. "We are probably going to die. But we will not die quietly. We will not die begging. We will make them remember us. We will make them afraid. And maybe, just maybe, we will show them that humans are not easy prey." The crew listened. They did not cheer or shout. They simply nodded and returned to their work. They understood what was being asked of them. They accepted it. Zethral watched all of this through his sensors. He did not understand what he was seeing. These humans should be falling apart. They should be fighting among themselves, blaming each other, searching desperately for escape. Instead, they were preparing for battle with the calm efficiency of a species that had been fighting for survival since the beginning of their existence. For the first time in 40 years, Zethral felt something he could not identify. Later, he would recognize it as the beginning of fear. The hour counted down. The Vorathi fleet moved into position. And on a dying ship in the middle of nowhere, 200 humans prepared to show the galaxy what they were made of. The hour passed slowly, like a held breath that refused to release. Zethral kept his sensors focused on the human ship, recording everything he observed. What he saw made no sense to him. He had watched dozens of species face death over his long career, and they all behaved the same way. They panicked. They fought among themselves. They wasted their final moments in despair and regret. The humans did none of these things. Instead, they worked. Every single person on that ship was doing something useful. It was as if they had forgotten they were about to die. Or perhaps, Zethral thought, they simply did not care. On the bridge of the Starboard Hope, Lieutenant Kevin Gray ran combat simulations on his tactical console. The screen showed failure after failure, red numbers and warning lights, telling him that victory was impossible. He ran the simulations anyway. Each time, he learned something new. Each failure taught him what not to do. "Captain," he said without looking up, "if we can draw them into the asteroid field, We might be able to use the rocks as cover. The larger Varathi ships will have trouble maneuvering in tight spaces. Warren stood beside him, studying the same screens. What about their smaller escorts? That's where it gets tricky. We'll have to deal with them one at a time. Hit and run. Never stay in one place long enough for them to get a lock on us. How long can we survive doing that? Gray hesitated. He did not want to say the number out loud. Maybe 2 hours. 3, if we're lucky. Warren put a hand on his shoulder. Then we make those 3 hours count. In the engine room, Danny Cole worked with furious energy. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he pulled apart machinery and put it back together in new ways. The ship's engines were ancient technology, designed for cargo hauling rather than combat. They were never meant to run at combat speeds, never meant to perform the kind of maneuvers that Gray was planning. Cole was going to make them work anyway. Talk to me. Old girl, he whispered to the ship as he rewired a power junction. I know you're tired. I know you're hurt. But I need you to give me everything you've got. Just a little while longer. The engines hummed in response, their pitch changing slightly as more power flowed through the modified circuits. Cole smiled. 19%. It was not much, but it was better than before. Hannah Webb emerged from a maintenance shaft, her face covered in grease and dust. Chief, I finished rerouting the power from decks 9 through 12. We've got an extra 8% to work with. Cole nodded. Good work. Now I need you to do something crazy. Webb raised an eyebrow. Crazier than crawling through a burning maintenance shaft? I need you to disconnect the safety limiters on the main reactor. Webb stared at him. The safety limiters existed for a very good reason. Without them, the reactor could overload, and an overloaded reactor meant a very large explosion. Chief, if we do that, I know what it means, Cole said. But the captain has a plan. And for that plan to work, I need to be able to push this reactor past its limits. Webb was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded and crawled back into the maintenance shaft. Some things were more important than safety dot in the weapons bay. Maria Santos worked on her modified mining charges. The devices were simple in theory, but difficult in practice. Mining charges were designed to break apart asteroids, not penetrate military shields. Santos had spent the last 6 hours redesigning them, adding components salvaged from other systems, pushing them far beyond their intended purpose. Her assistant, a young man named Chris Palmer, watched her work with a mixture of fear and admiration. Will they actually work? He asked. Santos shrugged. Only one way to find out. That's not very reassuring. I'm not trying to be reassuring. I'm trying to build a weapon that can hurt those ships out there. She looked up at him, her eyes hard and focused. Every ship we damage is one less ship shooting at us. Every ship we destroy is more time for our people to survive. That's what matters. Palmer nodded and returned to his work. He understood now. Hope was not a plan. Hope was what you held onto while you did the actual work. Zephril intercepted internal communications from the human ship. He listened as Captain Warren addressed her crew over the ship's intercom system. Her voice was calm and clear, without any trace of fear or desperation. This is the captain speaking. I'm not going to lie to you. The odds are against us. We are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every way that matters. By every logical calculation, we should already be dead. She paused, and Zephril leaned forward in his observation pod. But here's the thing about humans. We've never been very good at math. We've never been good at knowing when to quit. Our ancestors crossed oceans in wooden boats. They climbed mountains that should have killed them. They walked out of Africa with nothing but stone tools and conquered an entire planet. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they refused to stop. Zephril made notes, trying to understand. This was not the speech of a dying species. This was something else entirely. The aliens out there think they know what we are. They think we're just another species to be conquered, another footnote in their history books. They're wrong. They don't know that every single one of you chose to be here. They don't know that we've been fighting for survival since the first humans stood upright on the plains of Earth. They don't understand that we don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because that's what we are. That's what we've always been. In the medical bay, Dr. Ortega paused in his work to listen. The wounded around him lay still, their eyes fixed on the ceiling-mounted speakers. In about 30 minutes, they're going to attack us. And when they do, we're going to show them something they've never seen before. We're going to show them what happens when you corner a human. We're going to make them pay for every inch. And when this is over, whether we live or die, they are going to remember us. They are going to fear us. And they are going to think twice before they ever threaten humanity again. The intercom clicked off. For a moment, the ship was silent. Then the crew returned to work with renewed focus. There was no cheering, no shouting, no dramatic music. There was only the quiet determination of people who had accepted their fate and decided to make it mean something. The Verati fleet finished its attack formation. 40 ships arranged in a perfect sphere around the asteroid field, cutting off every possible escape route. Commander Keth Voran sat on his bridge, watching the human ship on his view screen. It was such a small thing, so fragile and broken. He almost felt pity for the creatures inside Dot, almost. "Begin the attack," he ordered. The fleet moved forward, weapons charging, shields at full power. They expected an easy victory. They expected the humans to break and run, or perhaps to beg for mercy at the last moment. They expected this to be over quickly. They were wrong about everything. Zethral activated his recording devices and prepared to document the death of 200 humans. He had no idea that he was about to witness something that would change his understanding of the galaxy forever. The battle for the Starward Hope was about to begin. The first shots lit up the darkness of space like artificial lightning. Vorathi weapons fire streaked toward the Starward Hope. Bright blue beams of energy meant to tear through metal and flesh. The human ship should have been destroyed in the opening seconds. It should have crumbled under the overwhelming firepower of 40 warships. It did not. Captain Warren had positioned her ship behind a large asteroid, using the rock as a shield. The Vorathi weapons slammed into stone instead of hull, vaporizing chunks of the asteroid, but leaving the Starward Hope untouched. Now, Warren said quietly. Maria Santos pressed a button on her console. 2 modified mining charges launched from the ship's cargo bay, their small engines pushing them at maximum speed toward the Vorathi flagship. The devices were invisible against the backdrop of the asteroid field. Too small for standard sensors to detect. Commander Keth Voran did not see them coming. The charges struck his ship's shields and detonated. They should not have been able to penetrate military-grade shielding. Mining equipment was not designed for warfare. But Santos had spent 6 hours rebuilding those charges, adding components that focused the explosive force into a single concentrated point. The shields held for exactly 1 second before collapsing. The explosion ripped through the Vorathi flagship's forward section. Fire bloomed in the vacuum of space, silent and deadly. 3 smaller ships in close formation were caught in the blast wave. 2 of them broke apart immediately, their hulls torn open by the force of the detonation. The third spun away, disabled and burning. Zethral's observation pod shook from the distant explosion. He stared at his sensor readings, unable to believe what he was seeing. 4 Vorathi ships destroyed or disabled in the opening seconds of the battle. That was not supposed to happen. That was not possible. He rewound his recordings and watched again. The modified mining charges had moved so fast, so quiet, that even his advanced sensors had barely registered them. The humans had turned simple industrial equipment into weapons of war. It was crude. It was desperate. It was brilliant. On the Varathi flagship, Kethvorn pulled himself from the wreckage of his command chair. Blood ran down his face from a deep cut on his forehead. Warning lights flashed everywhere. Officers shouted damage reports. The ship was still functional, but barely. How? He demanded. How did they do this? No one could answer him. The stalwart Hope did not wait for the Varathi to recover. It dove deeper into the asteroid field, using the rocks as cover, weaving through spaces that should have been too narrow for a ship its size. Danny Cole pushed the engines harder than they had ever been pushed, the modified power systems screaming in protest but refusing to fail. "Keep us moving," Warren ordered. "Don't let them get a lock on us." Kevin Gray worked his tactical console with frantic precision, plotting courses through the asteroid maze, identifying hiding spots and ambush points. "Come left 30 degrees. There's a cluster of small asteroids that will give us cover." The ship turned hard, its structure groaning from the stress. Crew members grabbed onto walls and consoles to keep from being thrown across their stations. Nobody complained. Nobody hesitated. The Varathi fleet pursued, but they were not built for this kind of fighting. Their large warships had to slow down to navigate the asteroid field. Their formation broke apart as ships tried to find paths through the rocks. They could no longer coordinate their attacks. This was exactly what Warren wanted. Santos, target the isolated ships. Gray, find me firing solutions. Working on it, Captain. The stalwart Hope emerged from behind an asteroid and opened fire on a Varathi cruiser that had separated from its group. The human weapons were weaker than the alien technology, but at close range, they were effective enough. The cruiser's shields flickered under the assault. Before it could return fire, the human ship disappeared behind another rock dot, hit and run. Strike and vanish. The humans were not trying to win a straight fight. They were hunting. 1 hour into the battle, 11 Varathi ships were destroyed or disabled. The human ship had taken hits, new wounds added to old ones, but it was still fighting. Still moving. Still refusing to die. Zethral had stopped trying to write his report. He could only watch in stunned silence as the humans tore through the most powerful fleet the Varathi had ever assembled. His sensors tracked the battle, recording every detail, but his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. These humans should be dead. Every calculation said they should be dead. And yet they fought on, using every trick, every tactic, every desperate measure they could think of. He observed the human crew through his long-range sensors. They were exhausted. Some of them were wounded. The ship around them was falling apart. Fires burning in multiple sections, power flickering in others. And still they fought. On the bridge, Warren stood at the center of chaos. Smoke filled the air. A console exploded nearby, showering sparks across the deck. She did not flinch. "Damage report," she called out. "Shields are gone," Gray reported. "Hull breaches on decks 2, 5, and 8. We're losing atmosphere faster than we can seal the leaks." "Weapons?" Santos coughed from the smoke, but kept her hands on her controls. 4 mining charges left. Main guns are at 50%. Secondary weapons are offline. Engines? Cole's voice came over the intercom, strained and tired. "Holding at 17%, Captain. She's giving us everything she's got." Warren nodded. 17%. It was enough. It had to be enough that the Varathi regrouped outside the asteroid field. They had learned their lesson about chasing the humans into that maze of rocks. Now they surrounded the field, trapping the Starboard Hope inside. No escape, no retreat. But the humans had not expected to escape. They had expected to die from the beginning. Every minute they survived was a victory. Every ship they destroyed was a message to the galaxy. "Captain," Gray said quietly, "they're bringing in their heavy weapons. They're going to bombard the entire asteroid field." Warren closed her eyes for a moment. She had known this would happen eventually. The Vorathi would get tired of chasing her through the rocks and simply destroy the rocks themselves. It was the logical thing to do. How long until they're in position? 20 minutes. 20 minutes. That was all the time they had left. Warren opened her eyes and looked at her crew. These people had followed her into certain death without hesitation. They had fought harder than anyone had a right to expect. They had already done the impossible. Now she was going to ask them to do it again. "All hands," she said over the intercom. "This is the captain. The enemy is preparing to bombard the asteroid field. When they do, there will be nowhere left to hide. We have 20 minutes before that happens." She paused, letting the words sink in. "In 20 minutes, we are going to do something very stupid. We are going to attack their fleet directly. Not to win. We can't win. But we can hurt them. We can make them remember what happens when they corner humans. We can make sure that everyone who survives today carries our story to the rest of the galaxy." In the engine room, Danny Cole listened to the captain's words. He looked at the machines around him, the ancient engines that had carried them so far. They had one more miracle left in them. He was sure of it. 20 minutes, he whispered to the ship. "Just give me 20 more minutes." The engines hummed in response, and somewhere deep in their mechanical hearts, they found a little more power to give. The Helen commander, Sovereign Ithrix, took control of the remaining fleet after Kefvarum was carried to the medical bay. She was older than him, more experienced and far more patient. Where the Vorathi commander had been aggressive and proud, Ithrix was cold and calculating. She did not chase enemies into traps. She brought the traps to them. "All ships form a bombardment line around the asteroid field," she ordered. "We will destroy every rock large enough to hide behind. When the humans have no cover left, we will finish them." Her officers carried out the command without question. The remaining ships spread out in a wide circle, their heavy weapons charging. The bombardment would take time, but it would be thorough. When it was over, nothing would survive in that asteroid field. Zethral watched the Helen strategy unfold and nodded to himself. This was the correct response. Ithrix understood that the humans were dangerous in close quarters, so she was removing the close quarters entirely. It was logical. It was efficient. It was exactly what any experienced commander would do. The bombardment began. Massive. Energy beams lanced into the asteroid field, vaporizing rocks by the dozen. Explosions lit up space like a violent sunrise. The Stalwart Hope shook as asteroids around it were destroyed. The shock waves battering its already weakened hull. Captain Warren gripped the armrest of her command chair as the ship rattled. On the view screen, she watched her hiding places disappear one by one. The Helen were systematic, working their way inward from the outer edges of the field. They would reach her ship in about 15 minutes. "Status report," she said, her voice steady despite everything. Kevin Gray checked his sensors. "They're destroying the field from the outside in. At this rate, we'll be exposed in 12 to 15 minutes. Options? We can try to stay ahead of the bombardment. Keep moving to areas they haven't cleared yet. But that's just delaying the inevitable. Eventually, there won't be anywhere left to go." Warren nodded. She had expected this. The plan she had in mind was desperate, possibly insane. But it was the only chance they had to make their final moments count. "All hands. Prepare for Operation Last Stand. Non-essential personnel to the escape pods." The crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had drilled for this scenario during the long hour before the battle began. 150 crew members made their way to the escape pods, taking only what they could carry. The wounded were moved on stretchers, carefully loaded into the small craft. Dr. Ortega supervised the medical evacuations personally. He moved from pod to pod, making sure each patient was secure, checking vital signs one last time. When he reached the last group, he paused. Corporal Amy Flores lay on a stretcher, both of her legs encased in regeneration casts. She had been injured 2 days ago when an explosion rocked the ship during their initial escape from the Coalition ambush. She could not walk, could not fight, could barely move without assistance. "Doctor," she said as Ortega approached. "What's the plan?" Ortega hesitated. He knew what the plan was. He also knew that the medical bay's life support systems would be shut down when they rerouted power for the final assault. Anyone who stayed behind in the medical section would die when the life support failed. "We're evacuating to the escape pods," he said. "You'll be safe there." Flores shook her head. "I heard the captain's announcement. You're going to need the escape pods for something else. For the decoys." She was right. Warren's plan called for launching all 23 escape pods simultaneously, each one modified to broadcast a signal that mimicked the Starward Hope. The Helen would be forced to split their forces to chase each pod, buying time for the real ship to make its final attack. But that meant there would be no room for passengers on those pods, not until after they completed their decoy mission. "The pods will circle back after the Helen identified the real ship," Ortega said. "You'll be picked up. I promise." Flores looked at him with clear, knowing eyes. "Doc, we both know the odds of that happening. The pods will be running on automatic. Half of them will probably be destroyed before they can circle back. And even if they do make it, by then?" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. "I want to stay," she said quietly. "You can't. You need life support. If you stay on the ship, I know what happens if I stay on the ship." Flores reached out and took his hand. "I signed up for this, Doc. I knew the risks when I joined the crew. Let me make my own choice." Ortega stood frozen, torn between his duty as a doctor and his respect for her decision. Around him, other wounded crew members were listening. He saw the same look in their eyes, the same determination, the same willingness to sacrifice. Captain Warren's voice came over the intercom. "All escape pods, prepare for launch." Ortega made his decision. He began disconnecting the wounded from their life support machines, moving them toward the pods. But when he reached Flores, he stopped. "Are you sure?" He asked one last time. "Give them hell, Doc." He nodded and moved on. Behind him, 11 wounded crew members chose to stay with the ship. They knew they would not survive. They chose to stay anyway. The escape pods launched, scattering in 23 different directions. Each one broadcast signals designed to confuse enemy sensors, making each tiny pod look like a full-sized warship. The Helen fleet, uncertain which target was real, was forced to send ships to chase each pod. Ithrix recognized the tactic immediately. It was clever, but ultimately futile. She ordered her ships to identify the real target and ignore the decoys. But identification took time, and time was something the humans were buying with their lives. On the Starward Hope, only 47 people remained. The ship felt empty now, its corridors silent except for the hum of machinery and the distant thunder of explosions outside. These 47 had all volunteered to stay. They knew they would not survive. They stayed anyway. Hannah Webb had finished her work on the reactor. The safety limiters were disconnected, the power systems modified to channel every last watt of energy into a single massive pulse. When activated, the pulse would fry the electronics of every ship within a 10-kilometer radius. It would also drain the Starward Hope of all power, leaving it dark and helpless. "Chief," she reported to Cole over the intercom. "The pulse is ready. Just give the word." Cole looked at his engines, still running at 17%, still holding together despite everything. They would need to get close to the enemy fleet for the pulse to work. Very close. "Captain," he said over the ship's comm system, "we're ready down here." On the bridge, Warren nodded. "All hands, this is it. We're going in." The Starboard Hope emerged from the remains of the asteroid field and accelerated toward the Helen fleet. Its engines screamed, pushed beyond all safe limits. Its hull groaned under the stress. Fires burned in a dozen compartments. It was dying, but it was not dead yet. Zethro watched through his sensors as the human ship charged directly at the enemy fleet. It was suicide. Pure, undeniable suicide. And yet the humans did not hesitate, did not slow down, did not show any sign of fear. He began to understand something. These creatures were not fighting because they thought they could win. They were fighting because fighting was who they were. Because surrender was simply not in their nature. Because they would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. It was terrifying. And it was beautiful. The pulse fired at exactly 0512 hours, Galactic Standard Time. A wave of electromagnetic energy exploded outward from the Starboard Hope, invisible but devastating. 19 Helen and Varathi ships were caught in its radius. Their systems went dark. Their engines failed. Their weapons powered down. They drifted helplessly in space, blind and deaf. The Starboard Hope, now completely without power, continued on its final course. Momentum carried it forward, straight toward the largest Helen cruiser. Warren stood on her dark bridge, surrounded by emergency lighting and the quiet breathing of her crew. The view screen was dead, but she could picture what was about to happen. "It was an honor," she said softly. Around her, 46 voices answered as one. The honor was ours. "Captain." The Starboard Hope struck the Helen cruiser at full speed. The impact was catastrophic, both ships crumpling like paper, fire and debris exploding outward in a silent storm of destruction. Zethro watched it happen, and for the first time in 40 years, he wept. The silence that followed the destruction of the Starboard Hope was profound. For a long moment, nothing moved. The debris field drifted slowly outward, pieces of two ships mixed together in death. The disabled vessels floated in the darkness, their crews struggling to restore power, to understand what had just happened. Zethro sat in his observation pod, staring at the wreckage. His recording devices were still running, capturing every detail, but he could not bring himself to speak. He had come here, expecting to document the end of 200 humans. He had not expected to witness the end of a legend. The Helen fleet was devastated. Of the 12 ships they had brought to the battle, only 3 remained functional. The Varathi had lost 15 of their 20 warships. The Draxis Collective, who had held back during most of the fighting, had lost 2 of their 8 vessels to debris from the final explosion. Total coalition losses: 26 ships destroyed, 8 more disabled beyond field repair. 64% of the combined fleet, eliminated by a single damaged cargo vessel with a crew of 200. The survivors did not celebrate. There was no victory here. Even the Draxis commander, who had been eager for human blood at the start of the day, looked shaken as he surveyed the wreckage on his view screen. "Retreat," Sovereign Ithrix ordered, her voice hollow. "All functional ships, retreat immediately." No one questioned the command. No one suggested staying to hunt down the escape pods that still scattered through the system. No one wanted to fight any more humans today. The 6 remaining warships gathered their wounded, recovered what survivors they could from the disabled vessels, and fled at maximum speed. They left behind a graveyard of broken ships and shattered pride. Zethro watched them go. Then he turned his sensors back to the escape pods. 23 pods had been launched. 14 had been destroyed during the battle, shot down by Helen ships before they could be identified as decoys. But 9 pods had survived. They drifted now in the outer reaches of the system, their engines cold, their occupants waiting for rescue. 83 humans still lived. 6 hours later, a civilian transport called the Faithful Dawn arrived in the system. It had picked up the distress beacon from the escape pods and come to investigate. The ship was a small cargo hauler, not designed for rescue operations, but its captain, a woman named Rosa Martinez, did not care about design specifications. She pulled every survivor out of those pods. 83 humans, many of them wounded, all of them exhausted. They were given food, water, medical attention, and a place to sleep. They were safe. In the days that followed, the story spread across the galaxy. The Varathi tried to suppress it at first. They claimed the battle had been a minor skirmish, unfortunate encounter with human pirates. But too many of their own soldiers had been there. Too many had seen what happened. The truth leaked out through whispered conversations and encrypted messages. A single human ship had defeated a coalition of 40 warships. Other species heard the story and did not believe it at first. Humans were a young race, barely a century into space travel. They had no great fleets, no advanced weapons, no history of military conquest. They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be easy prey. The survivors of the Nexion 7 battle told a different story. They spoke of a human captain who refused to surrender, of crew members who laughed in the face of death, of modified mining charges that punched through military shields, of a ship that kept fighting long after it should have been destroyed, of a final charge into the heart of the enemy fleet, a suicide attack that took 19 ships with it. The Galactic Council requested a formal report from Zethral. He spent 3 days writing it, struggling to find words that could capture what he had witnessed. In the end, he submitted a document unlike any he had ever produced. "I was assigned to monitor humans in battle," he wrote. "I expected to document their defeat, their extinction, their final moments as a footnote in galactic history. Instead, I watched a massacre unfold. But the massacre was not what anyone had anticipated." He described the battle in detail, from the first shot to the final impact. He included sensor logs, communication intercepts, and his own observations. He did not editorialize or speculate. He simply reported what he had seen done, but at the end of his report, he added a section that went beyond simple observation. "I have studied 47 species across my career. I have witnessed courage, desperation, cunning, and sacrifice. But I have never seen anything like what the humans call fighting spirit. It is not rational. It does not calculate odds or weigh costs. It simply refuses to accept defeat. The coalition lost 64% of their forces to a single damaged vessel with a crew of 200. This was not supposed to be possible. By every metric we use to predict combat outcomes, the humans should have been annihilated in minutes. They were not. I am amending my species assessment. Humans are not a minor power to be monitored. They are not a curiosity to be studied. They are a warning." He paused in his writing, thinking about Captain Lisa Warren and her crew, thinking about the calm way they had prepared for death, the fierce way they had fought for life, thinking about the 11 wounded crew members who had chosen to stay on the ship rather than burden the escape pods. "When you fight humans," he continued, "you are not fighting soldiers. You are fighting something older, something bred into their bones across a million years of evolution on a death world they call Earth. You are fighting the descendants of creatures who hunted giant beasts with sharpened sticks, who crossed frozen continents on foot, who looked at the stars and said, 'We will go there,' no matter the cost. Their ancestors survived ice ages, plagues, and countless wars. They climbed out of the mud and reached for the sky. They made fire. They built cities. They split the atom and touched the moon. And through all of it, through every disaster and setback and tragedy, they kept going. They kept fighting. They refused to give up. That is what we saw at Nexion 7, not just a battle, but a demonstration of what humans are capable of when pushed to the edge. They did not fight because they thought they could win. They fought because that is who they are. That is what they have always been. The 83 survivors of the Starbound HFY have been rescued. They will return to human space as heroes. But more importantly, they will return as a message. A message to every species in the galaxy who thought humans were weak. A message to every empire that considered humanity easy prey. The message is simple. Do not corner them. Do not give them a reason to fight. And whatever you do, do not expect them to surrender. Because humans do not surrender. They do not give up. They do not accept defeat. They will fight to the last breath, the last bullet, the last drop of blood. And even if you destroy them, they will make you pay such a terrible price that you will never forget them. Captain Lisa Warren and her crew are gone, but their story will echo across the stars for generations. Every species will hear it. Every empire will remember it. And every military commander in the galaxy will think twice before engaging humans in battle. That is their legacy. That is their victory. The Starbound HFY may be destroyed, but the hope it represented will never die. The humans made sure of that. They wrote their message in fire and blood, and the galaxy will never forget it. Zethral finished his report and submitted it to the council. Then he sat alone in his observation pod, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 83 humans were making their way home. They were wounded and grieving, but they were alive. They had survived against impossible odds, just as their species had always done. And somewhere in the distance, the debris of the Starbound HFY continued to drift. A silent monument to 200 humans who had refused to go quietly into the dark. Zethral raised an imaginary glass to them. To the humans, he whispered, "May the galaxy never forget what you taught us today." The stars twinkled in response, indifferent and eternal. But Zethral knew that somewhere among them, the story was already spreading. The legend was already being born. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy. And the galaxy would never be the same.